I am here today with Christopher Dines to discuss his new book, Drug Addiction Recovery, which is published by Sheldon Press, which is a subdivision of Hachette UK. And the foreword is by Rudolph E. Tanzi, who is a professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School. Hello, Christopher.
Hi, Izzy.
So why did you write this book and why publish it now?
Okay, so firstly, as a mindfulness practitioner, I've worked in the addiction field for 12 and a half years. And secondly, I'm in recovery, so I'm over 14 years clean and sober. I've worked various different programs with regard to my own personal growth. But there's no doubt that we have a problem in the UK and in the West really. Drug addiction is rife. It's not just in the UK. If you look in America as well, there's just a terrible problem. And things have just got way out of hand in Canada and Europe. So I think this is a good time actually. There are many great addiction recovery books out there, but I think just putting this out at this time, I think it may be able to help or assist.
Mm-hmm. And in the book, you emphasise the importance of coming to terms with suppressed grief. And why is this so important in recovery?
So for me personally, I used to numb out. Okay, so I would push down my feelings, and as a result, I wasn't able to really get in tune with how I was feeling. Therefore, I wasn't able to communicate with clarity and authenticity. And so therefore my relationships with others were impaired because authenticity is crucial in order to have sustained, healthy and vibrant relationships. And so as an addict, while I was just sort of out of it, but when I came into recovery, I probably spent 4 years just frozen really. I was clean. I was attending support groups, I'd taken a personal inventory, I'd looked at all aspects of my addictiveness, but I never really got in touch with what the late John Bradshaw described as the hole in the soul. I never got in touch with my deep pain and frozen grief. Now I've been able to make peace with my childhood wounds and therefore I can communicate better, and there's a sense of self-respect and appreciation for life, and I just feel more connected to my fellow human beings. And addicts that do address their frozen grief and report that their emotional well-being has amplified, and they certainly feel a lot better in themselves.
Mm-hmm. You've written that frozen grief and trauma and addiction are 3 separate conditions. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think it's very dangerous for a recovering drug addict, including an alcoholic, to presume that just because they've looked at their frozen grief and they've addressed their childhood wounds that they're, quote, cured from addiction. Addiction is an illness, and trauma is a separate condition. And so, for instance, there are many people who've been traumatised, but they don't necessarily have to check into a drug and alcohol rehab. So, but yet most drug addicts will have trauma, PTSD, complex PTSD, suppressed grief as well. So they're separate conditions. It's very dangerous to sort of put them all together, which often you hear in society, and I hear it as well, and I think it's quite dangerous actually.
The subtitle of the book is The Mindful Way, and how can mindfulness help someone recover from addiction?
Well, look, I'm a mindfulness practitioner. Mindfulness essentially means self-awareness. It's awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, bodily sensations, our environment. So being aware of my thought life shields me from just believing all of the inner critical voices. For example, I could have repetitive thoughts of not being good enough, not quite making the grade, being quote useless, and all of these sort of damaging thoughts and the emotions reflecting that as well. So with clarity, there's a deeper awareness that, well, you know, I may have a destructive thought, but I'm not that thought. And mindfulness as well has been proven to assist addicts with regard to relapse prevention as well. And again, it enhances mental and emotional well-being.
You've also written about the importance of self-forgiveness. How is this relevant to an addict in recovery?
So I personally, I found it very hard again to sort of sit with myself until I'd learned to just give myself a break, really. You know, I made a lot of mistakes when I was, while I was using. I've made mistakes in recovery as well. That's part of being human. But it's just a way to demonstrate kindness inwards, really. And if I can demonstrate kindness, and if I can direct compassion inwards, then it's much more likely that I can be compassionate towards others and demonstrate kindness as well. But it starts within. I have to accept myself fully before I can accept other people.
And I noticed that you've dedicated your book to your late grandmother, Joyce Dines. What impact did she have on your childhood?
Well, she was a very caring, loving, warm woman, very intelligent and very non-assuming as well. So I had a beautiful relationship with her. She died suddenly of a heart attack. I think I was about 13 at the time. Now, I was already drinking at that time. I was already smoking marijuana. But when she died, I completely shut down. In fact, I went to school the following day and just after she died, and just sort of walked around like nothing had happened. And in hindsight, that's when, emotionally speaking, I completely shut down. It took me 4 years into my primary recovery to actually come to terms with that loss. And so I've made peace with that. But I mean, it was just, it was devastating, really. So I was very close with her. So she's only, you know, my grandfather, he died when I was 2 years in recovery. So I've been able to make sort of peace with my family now that I'm in recovery, but she died before I got into recovery. So she must have seen that her grandchild was changing my behaviour, which happens when you're drinking and drugging. So that's why I dedicated the book to her. Yeah, it's a bit of closure.
And finally, where can we buy your book?
Okay, so you can buy Drug Addiction Recovery from most bookshops in the UK. That will be the case as well in the US, probably 2 weeks after this video is published, and online as well, probably Amazon.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Christopher.
Thank you very much, Izzy.